We ran for so many hours. Even though we could have stopped for a break in between this running, the fire had reached the forest and was burning it down extremely quickly. Embers had hit my leg and burned off parts of the bandages that were still left on my body. By the time the forest opened up to a massive grass field outside of the city, it was nighttime. I couldn't see the smoke anymore, which is an amazing sight to see. Yes, I know that running into the forest and being in the middle of nowhere at nighttime is stupid, but what else could we have done? Something I faintly remember is Joshua going down another path in the woods while I went down the opposite path. We lost each other right there. Since I left the fairgrounds, we haven't seen another soul. Most of my run through the entire forest is very faint in my memory, and I don't remember much. Laying down in that dry summer grass and hearing the wolves howl and the crickets chirp made me feel helpless. I was definitely going to die with no one to save me. I looked up at the moon, slightly illuminating the western horizon. It was going to set soon, and it was my only source of light out here for the next 30 or so minutes. I had to take advantage of it as much as possible. "Hello?" murmured a very dry, weak, and feeble voice from behind me. I turned around and saw someone limping. It seemed to be a young adolescent emerging from the overgrown grass. "Over here!" I yelled in my hoarse voice. The random person ran over to me, panting. "Are you okay?" he asked with sympathy. I nodded, even though I was a lie. "Did you get caught in the disaster that struck the fair?" I asked. "Yep, and now we're in the middle of nowhere," he replied. "My name is Calvin, by the way." I handshook Calvin. "Nice to meet you. My name is Leo," I said with confidence. Calvin looked at me, stepping away slightly. "I think I know you. Are you lying? Or are you really the real Leo?" Calvin asked. I nodded. My throat started feeling really sore. I didn't want to speak. "You're the most exalted person in the city," Calvin smiled. I smiled in unison. "We need to get out of here before we die from a wild animal or the forest fire," said Calvin. I quickly peeked over the top of the forest. The fire was illuminating the horizon, burning down the trees. "Anyways, I found this boy named Joshua in the forest," said Calvin. He was holding a wooden crucifix in his hand, crying profusely. My face lit up. "Joshua?" I exclaimed, disregarding my sore throat and hoarse-sounding voice. "Yes, he's walking over to this field right now," said Calvin, reciprocating my enthusiastic voice. "Are you guys friends?" I quickly nodded before I turned around and saw Joshua. From afar, he looked like a feeble kid. I ran through the grass to Joshua, yelling his name as I did so. "Josh, I thought you were dead," I said, tearing up while hugging Joshua. "I'm okay. You didn't have to worry about me," replied Joshua. I stepped away from him a bit. "Are you all right?" I asked, looking Joshua in the eyes. He was holding that wooden crucifix that Calvin was talking about. "Sure, I guess," murmured Joshua. "I feel really sick, though. I think I need to sit down somewhere." Joshua sat down in the grass. Calvin tapped me on the back. "I don't think we should speak to him right now. He's probably exhausted from running for all those hours," whispered Calvin. I turned around and looked up at him. "I'm sure he's fine. It's not the first time he's acted like this," I replied. The moon that was illuminating the western horizon began to completely disappear. Now it was completely pitch black with only the fire creeping closer and closer to us, illuminating the night. I kneeled on the ground to check on Joshua. His eyes were closed and he wasn't breathing. "Calvin!" I yelled through the empty field. "Come here. Something happened to Joshua." Calvin ran over and kneeled down on the grass. He looked at Joshua, then back at me with a disturbed look. "He's not sleeping. He's still awake, but his eyes are petrified," said Calvin, stepping back a little. I put my hand under Joshua's chin and slowly yet carefully lifted his head up. Inside those eyes were an unmatched level of fear. I stood up and took a few steps back. "You okay?" I asked Joshua with a shake in my voice. His brownish hazel eyes turned into a glowing red. Joshua growled with anger. "I am—" Joshua started choking violently mid-speaking. He started bleeding profusely as the wooden crucifix he was holding slipped out of his hand and was lying on the ground. I grabbed it before it was covered in the pool of blood developing under Joshua. "What in the world? Josh! Josh!" I yelled, panicking while a waterfall of tears started forming under my eyes. I tried laying a hand on Joshua's shoulder. He was gasping for air as he continued bleeding. I felt my whole world slip away. My face turned cold and the screams of Joshua rang through the entire grass field. As I lifted my hand from Joshua's shoulder, he fell cold to the ground. He was completely dead. His face was oxygen deprived, and his skin was a bloody mess. I looked at my hands soaked in fresh blood. I felt myself collapse on the ground before I began to cry like a baby. No! I screamed into the empty night. No! Joshua couldn't have died. I continued bawling my eyes out irresistibly. What I didn't hear in my loud emotional breakdown was the sound of an approaching predator in the night, finding us in a hopeless position. The predator that was the killer of Joshua. "Who are you?" yelled Calvin in a frightened voice. I could hear his yelling through my sobs, and this was when I decided to look up and see what Calvin was talking about. "What happened, Calvin?" I asked, salty tears entering my mouth as I spoke. Calvin stuttered for a bit before he replied. "Just look up," he yelled. I looked up, down, and to my left. Then, when I turned to my right, I couldn't believe the sight that I was presented with. Mr. Franklin was standing shallowly in the field. A smirk was glued to his face. Mortified wouldn't be the best word to describe my emotions when I saw him. "If Joshua couldn't kill Leo, he was going to get killed," said Mr. Franklin, stepping up closer to Joshua's dead body. "But now that it's just you two here and nobody else to save you, I can finally kill Leo in peace," croaked Mr. Franklin with a cackle. Subsequently, afterward that infuriated me more than I already was. Amidst tears of anger and sadness, I looked at him, trying to speak some words. The only thing that came out of my mouth was, You did all of this?" I began to cry even harder now as I tried to scoot away from Mr. Franklin. I was too late to escape Mr. Franklin's grasp, however, as he kicked me in a very rapid motion right into the blood. A pool of blood developed on the ground from Joshua's dead body. "You better shut it, or else I'll make it even more brutal," yelled Mr. Franklin, his gaze staring down at my feeble self. I felt my leg pound with pain after Mr. Franklin's harsh kick. "Leo!" yelled Calvin. I knew I couldn't let myself submit to Mr. Franklin. I wasn't ever going to let this happen to me. I still had a bit of strength inside of me, so I was going to use it to fight him. I began to stand up, soaked in blood. I looked at Mr. Franklin absently. "You org," I mumbled under my breath, blood from my soaked hair dripping down onto my face, beginning to mix with the tears on my face. "Org," said Mr. Franklin, hysterically, laughing now. "Hate to break it to you, but if you keep calling me these words, it won't do anything but hurt yourself." Mr. Franklin ran up to me and grabbed my collar. "Now shut it, or else I will kill you," he said, his teeth clenched tightly. Mr. Franklin grabbed my collar so tightly that I began choking. Calvin couldn't save me, and as I was being choked, I remembered what Mr. Franklin said to me at the circus. "And now that's just you and me and you together, with nobody else to save you. You can kiss goodbye to your lovely planet that everybody calls Earth. For me, I call it hell." My blur of memorabilia and reminiscence of that moment on stage with Mr. Franklin, I heard a voice shout something in the stale air filled with death. "Oh my God, look, we finally found Leo." Mr. Franklin let go of my collar and snapped around. Took a loud, deep breath before turning around to see who shouted that. I could faintly make out the figures of 3 teenagers standing proudly and firmly. Because it was dark, I couldn't really make out who they were and what they looked like. "And you guys are?" I muttered while Mr. Franklin took a few steps back. "Adeline!" exclaimed Adeline. "Chris is here too." A major twist in events. Firstly, Joshua dying, and now my friends coming to find me out in the dark. I was being flooded with so many emotions that I couldn't comprehend. "What's happening?" Christopher asked, realizing that nobody could speak due to some underlying factor. Christopher turned on a bright flashlight and swung it in my direction. Soon the light caught on to Joshua's motionless body, and Christopher stopped swaying the flashlight everywhere. "Who the heck is that?" Christopher asked while running up to Joshua's body. Audibly gulped as Christopher kneeled down to examine Joshua's dead body. He examined the body for around 10 seconds before dropping the flashlight in fear. Christopher's face was riddled with shock and anger. He tilted his head to Mr. Franklin. "Are you the killer?" Christopher asked. "He's the killer!" I shouted at Christopher. "Mr. Franklin killed his own son!" Adeline was about 4 feet behind Christopher when she heard the words that came out of my mouth. She looked at me with chagrin and a message in her expression signaling, "We need to get out of here before we die." "Get away from my son," yelled Mr. Franklin. "He'll rest calmly in the depths of hell. No one needs to disturb his resting." Christopher grabbed the flashlight and walked over to where I was standing. I looked behind me and saw Calvin silently standing in the night with no emotion. I felt bad for him. "So you killed Joshua?" Adeline asked, sadness appearing in her voice as she began audibly crying. Mr. Franklin growled. "I might have," he replied with hesitation. After Mr. Franklin spoke, I felt a cold breeze hit my face. I turned around in every direction, and Mr. Franklin was gone. I couldn't see Adeline, Christopher, or Calvin. My heartbeat was the only sound I could hear. "Chris?" I yelled into the night. No response. "Anyone?" I stood in dead silence, wanting to cry but not having the willpower to do so. What is going to happen now? What card did Mr. Franklin have up his sleeves? Morning of June 19th, 2019. I woke up in the back of a car. I didn't know where I was. I don't remember ever going into a car. I was severely dehydrated and not able to speak because of my dehydration. Two people in the front seats of the car were speaking. Their speaking was incomprehensible. My vision was hazy, my head was throbbing, and I overall felt like garbage. The city looked the same even after the forest fire. Was that some sort of illusion? Did it even happen? I looked out of the car window. All I saw was misery, only because my whole world was switched around in a way I could never cope with in a couple days. The only thing I had to remember Joshua was the wooden crucifix he dropped while dying.